How are you doing today? Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm doing great. It's just like, life has become a bunch of Zoom calls, one after the other. And I work from home. And so it's an interesting debate that we constantly keep on having, which is, I mean, we've been remote first at AppSmith from day one. So while there are parts of it that are awesome, obviously async work and all of that stuff, but as a non-engineer in a work from home setting, it's a contact sport, right? So
Yeah,
so
absolutely. What's your thoughts on it then? Like what's because there's this huge debate now in the commercial world, work from home, hybrid, or in the office. I've seen many people with many different views. I find that the most popular one on LinkedIn is that work from home is the way forward. But then when I was working in a corporate office, I felt a lot of people were like, no, we need to be face to face, like we need to come in. It's quite
yeah,
important. What's your
yeah.
thoughts?
Firstly, on the LinkedIn part and in social media in general, I feel like it's just so hard to make sense of what anyone is saying anymore. I feel like I think I tweeted about this where it feels like everybody is just paraphrasing someone else. Like it's so hard to see original thoughts anymore, right? Like everything is like, hey, do you know about how this person did X? And it's just like sort of everybody seems like a curator these days on social media. Um,
Wow.
but on this specific topic, I think what's great with there's definitely huge benefits, right? So like we wouldn't be able to attract the kind of talent if we weren't fully remote. I mean, like it's incredible. We have people from like 30 different countries. So that's awesome. You can also get, if you work smartly, you can get a lot done because, it's possible where you have teams in different time zones, you discuss in the morning and then somebody else is up in the evening. So it's like you have 24/7 ops in some ways. The challenge is that, like a lot of that serendipity which happens when you're in the office, the water cooler talks, the
Yeah, yeah.
ideas, especially in roles like product marketing, sales for sure. A
Yep.
lot of those things end up becoming a little, challenging. And that's when you start sort of, missing out. The other part is it's, unless you're in the same city and you're working from home, work also becomes a little bit transactional where like it's like, hey, get this job done, and now it's like, okay, I have no idea what's going on with your life beyond work, which has an interesting dynamics around just the belongingness aspect and
Yeah.
things like loyalty. It seems like such a quaint concept in 2023 where people have 10 different jobs. But I feel like those kinds of things start sort of, mattering. So,
I wanted to just add to that last point you made because so I recently started working for an American firm as a contractor, and I was told by my contact in America who placed me there. He said he's an Irish guy, so I grew up in Ireland, so we had that kind of connection. And he was like, sirs, you should watch out because it's very different to working in London in an office because these American guys they don't really have they have a much more defined boundary between social and work. They're not trying to be your friend. They want you to come in, do your job, deliver results, and leave. They're not too worried about what you do outside of work. It's not a big deal to them. Just whereas you'll find in London, and I've experienced this firsthand, going out for Wednesday drinks, going out for Thursday drinks, dinners, your colleagues basically become your friends, and it's much more common and omnipresent kind of uh, a cultural reality. So I do question which one is better, or if it really depends on the individual. Because I prefer this kind of come in, do the work, see you later, guys, enjoy my life, and then come back the next day and do the same thing. There's like that disconnect between, or I'm going to do my own thing, and my work colleagues aren't really a part of that or not prying into my business. But I imagine there's a lot of people, as you said, the key word there, belonging, sense of uh, sense of ownership to the organization and loyalty. Because if you said to me, "Am I loyal to the organization?" It would be hard to say yes. Not that I wouldn't want to, but it would just be hard to because I'm essentially a hitman for hire. I've got a task to do, and that's it.
yeah. I'm not sure on the difference between the US, UK, that distinction because I think everywhere people love to catch up, right? I think it's about proximity. Like something like London is just so even though it's a massive city, it doesn't feel that large, right? Simply because like everything is connected. You could be staying in zone 5 and still like end up meeting, it's like a 20-minute tube ride, right? Versus in the US, it can get a little tricky unless you're like in a big city which is densely populated and has great transportation like New York, or it's smaller like SF, because like the person who's coming into work, probably it took him like an hour to reach there because they had to drive like 50 miles. But I do think that I don't think it's a cultural thing from a location perspective as much as it's just like what kinds of people you have, right? I think it becomes like a company specific kind of a DNA stuff, because like
Yeah.
beer is available in every country. So I'm sure, I'm sure people catch up often. But yeah, it's definitely something which is especially I think as your teams become a little larger, right? Because
Yeah,
when
for
you're
sure.
small, when you're like a startup with 5 people, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's very close knit. Everybody knows what you're doing, versus I think the moment it starts becoming like 30, 40, 50 people is when you start having those. It's almost like there's a step function at every stage, right? Like, and that's when it starts getting a little tricky. Like, how do you manage it, and this complexity
That's,
and
that's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really true, Rishabh. I want to go back to something you just said as well about basically a lot of stuff being online being an echo chamber, right? You see the same thing over and over. It's true, right? You just scroll through LinkedIn, you see the same post over and over, reformatted, reworded, and it's essentially the same thing. And it's a lot of sheep following the herd.
yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, as someone who's experienced in marketing, how can you actually identify what a good piece of content is? Whether it's coming from a genuine place, or someone saying it to spark controversy, and kind of what your take around that is. And maybe if you've seen a good example of a piece in maybe the last week that stood out to you as not being just a kind of copy paste cookie cutter piece of content.
Yeah, so a lot of my so there's like a two-pronged, as marketeers, you have like a dual sort of approach, right? Where on one side you're thinking of yourself as an individual, which is where a lot of the stuff that you mentioned becomes relevant. And then the second part is you're also thinking as a professional, where you're like, okay, you know what? If this is what the world wants, then let's go after it. It's a bit like how they say that a democracy gets the leaders that they deserve, kind of thing, right? And so at a personal level, I think obviously like I'm in the dev tools space. So every morning I'll just go hang out on Hacker News. There's a lot of great content there. I think the Hacker News community is interesting because the bar for BS is so low, like it just wouldn't even surface at the top, right? So a lot of interesting content I end up consuming from there. And it's not always necessarily highly technical stuff. For example, one of the best written posts that I saw last week was around design. So this was on the top page of Hacker News the whole of last week. This was a post around the simple things that, and it was written from a perspective of a designer, but the audience could be anybody. Like anybody could understand it. It was like, what are like the 10, 12 things that you can do to make sure that your design is really good? So it spoke about like font alignment, how you can select color palettes. And as a marketer, that's really relevant because when I'm thinking of content, I'm also thinking about the design that goes with it. And it was like just really, really interesting to see that. And then there's like a discussion with sparked off. I shared that with our design team. There was like a huge Slack thread. So that was like really interesting because then you walk away feeling like, hey, I've learned something. Um, and it's gone into a little bit of depth. I think the best kinds of content are either something which exposes you to something completely new, or it could be a thing that you know about, but it provides like an interesting new perspective. And you've pushed the boundary a little bit further because you added now your personal learnings or things like that, right? Especially for business content. So I think that kind of content is always interesting. The Within that also, I think what's interesting is like I feel like good content doesn't have to be perfect, like especially where you're talking about challenges that you face, the struggles. Like people want to see you struggling and then figuring out some sort of, it's almost like a movie, right? Like the hero has to fall into a trap and then figure out the answer, right? So like you go through that journey, and like those are the kinds of things that I find really, really interesting, right? Like because then you're learning something new. So like typically when I come across content, I look at, hey, what is there a new perspective that's sort of come here. It's not repetitive or things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point because from what you're saying, it's that experience and the journey is what's important. When content's coming from genuine experience that's authentic and unique to that person. Because I mean, if we go back to what we were talking about initially, it's like whenever it's repurposed, repackaged, it's somebody else's words that's
Yeah.
now been like Chinese whispers 20 people down on LinkedIn and it's sent out once more. I think it's a good point because a lot of people on LinkedIn who have got a lot of traction always say that, you know, telling a story goes a long way. Whenever you tell a story that's unique to you and if it's something that's personal to your life or something that's actually happened, that's the most powerful content because people can really relate to a story. And I think you always hear that as well. Human beings being natural storytellers and always gravitating to a narrative and to a story very well. So I think it's a I
Yeah.
don't know much about marketing, but I
Yeah.
believe it's like a core concept in marketing, right? To tell a
Yeah.
story with your brand.
Absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a place for curation, but often people want to hear, like it's almost like, say you go to a concert, you want to hear the real Led Zeppelin sing. You don't want to see a cover band who's singing Led Zeppelin unless you've specifically been told it's a cover band concert, right? Like, so,
Hmm.
so it feels like even if you're not an expert, like talk about what you have done, right? Don't tell me what others have done all the time and then package it like this bite-sized, flashing news.
Yeah.
Just likes, like, I mean, after a point, like, because the thing is that at the end of the day, you then end up feeling a bit of hollowness, right? You're like, what did I do the entire day? Oh, I went through like, 50 tweets, and like it doesn't help you at the end of the day. So
I, th-
even from a self-preservation perspective, I think, you
I think
know.
there's like a lesson there for listeners as well. It's something I've realized as well because I'm a huge fitness fan, right? And just by being in the gym, being around people training, posting stuff on Instagram, I get a lot of inbounds of people asking me, "Oh, can you help me out with this and this and that?" And I never kind of went into it with the intention of wanting to be a coach or educate people, but that kind of happens once you've built an audience and you've kind of found your passion, you hone in on it and you advertise it and you make it public to the world. So I think what you're saying is extrapolating on from that, any listeners kind of struggling what they should do, what they should post about and write about, you must have, one or two hobbies or interests or something you read about or just some kind of hobby you do after work or on the weekends that probably more than the average person about and just start writing about it. I think a lot of times for people starting out, it's like they have lofty ambitions for themselves in a certain field and they see themselves as the very, very bottom rung. So they think, why do I have anything to offer the world? Nothing that I'm creating will be of value because there are people out there creating far more than us, than I am. But then you have to come from a perspective like we did when we started out the podcast, actually, that there is huge value in having people that are kind of one or two steps ahead of you, showing you the way, showing you how it's done, and giving their experiences. Because that's the other thing as well. If you go on Twitter and LinkedIn, you see a lot of people who already have millions, hundreds of thousands, millions of followers, and they're telling you how to do X, Y, and Z. And a lot of the time, it can feel not relatable. Or it can feel quite detached from just a regular person trying to get traction for their one-person business or their small business, right?
Yep.
Be a
Yep.
bit demoralizing as well, I think. When you see someone with millions of followers telling you this 5-step process to, getting your first 5,000 followers, and you're like, well, if it's so easy, why the hell can't I do it?
A lot of
Yeah.
the time it's persistent. I feel like persistence is it's a missing ingredient as well. And people want to paint online as like, well, those hundreds of thousands of followers I got were just by following these steps and it happened like instantaneously. And there's always some kind of time element. It's like how to get X amount of followers in 90 days, right? And you feel that pressure to do it in a certain time frame. But what they're ignoring is the kind of years of expertise and learning through trial and failure that kind of preceded that, which isn't so
Yeah.
well documented online.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can't get it right the first time. It's such an iteration. iteration, right? So yeah, I agree. I agree.
Tell us about AppSmith as well. Like, what do you guys do? What's your role as a
Yeah.
marketer? How did it all come about? What was the pain point you were trying to solve? All of that good stuff.
Yeah. So AppSmith came out of so AppSmith is a developer tool which helps engineers build internal applications or custom software. And so the problem that we're really trying to solve is, like in when you guys either in your day-to-day work or something, there are consumer-facing apps like Deliveroo and TransferWise or something like that. But then you also have tools which are internal facing. So like if you're in a company, the users of those tools are just your internal employees. Think of expense reimbursement apps, or think of like a dashboard which is built, which helps you track marketing metrics, right? Or like when you ask for like a refund from a food delivery company, you get onto chat. That chat is going somewhere, and then there's a person probably there who is pressing some buttons to get you your refund, right? All of those things typically require a lot of engineering bandwidth. And you can't buy off the shelf SaaS products for that, because essentially what happens is the data in your organization is sitting in multiple different places. Some of it is sitting in SaaS products like Stripe or Salesforce or whatever. Some of it is sitting in your own databases. And so essentially what a lot of companies try to do is they try to create some sort of a UI layer on top of this data, so that you can democratize the access to this data to other teams who can now perform various functions to do that, right? So it could be the support team, it could be the sales team, it could be the HR team. And this is a pretty big problem because I think almost 30 to 40% of all the software which is written in the world is going towards these kinds of internal tools. So if you think of like a large bank, like a high street bank in the UK, they probably would have 1,000 such internal tools which is running their entire business. And it's often an engineer who's building this because it deals with a lot of sensitive data. So you have like security issues. So you want something which is like robust and can be used by an engineer. But at the same time, it's like engineers hate working on this stuff, right? Because they want to work on the cool consumer facing stuff. Like a designer would never want to work on this because they're like, why should I work on something which has 1,000 users when I can work on an app which has 1,000,000 users, right? That's why most of these tools end up looking like crap, right? Like even something like airline reservation systems, like when you go to the airport and you look at that person typing away to get your boarding card, like if you actually
Oh
peep
God,
over
yeah.
and look at what that interface looks like, it looks like something built in 1995, right? Probably was built in
That's
1995.
very, very topical given the whole situation in the US, right? Was it Delta Airlines? I think they had this whole kind of they shut down for like a whole day or a week or something because they
Yeah.
couldn't book in anyone and they didn't even know where their planes were in the sky at any one time because of this literally archaic backend system. I'm sure still running on kind of like Windows 98, as you said, just like really old fashioned. It's so unsexy and no one wants to attack it. And I think it's as you made the point, it's like people aren't aware of it because you would have had to have worked in one of these old-fashioned industries that say things like construction, more like transport infrastructure, airlines, and have exposure to just how poor these backend systems are for you to even realize it's a problem.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and technology has advanced. There's a lot of new age tools. It's just that they are very complicated, and they require a lot of effort. So if you just have to, like, typically what happens is that there'll be a company. They'll be like, yeah, we just have to make this one tool. It's simple. It's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's when you're building your 10th such tool, you realize that you have to maintain the 9 other tools that you have, and like all your engineering bandwidth is going into these things. And so it's like it's interesting. Like we sometimes like to joke that what we are doing is helping developers build apps that fill gaps. Because there are always gaps in different parts of your product or your processes, and these apps come and fill it, and you can do it really quickly. So that's what AppSmith does. I lead marketing at the company. I joined a couple of years back when we were, I think, around 10 people. We're about 130 people right now. And it's been a super interesting experience because prior to this, I used to run an HR tech software company, and you can imagine, right? Like from marketing to HR, which honestly are not the most tech savvy department in a company, to going towards developers in an open source environment, which are the most opinionated, edgy personalities out there. It's like the changing of the guard. So all the things that you learn in marketing for non-engineering personas, and some of it, which some of these things are like thought of as like ground truths. You start testing some of those assumptions when you move towards developer marketing. Something as simple as one of the things you hear in marketing is talk about the benefits and not the features, right? Like that's like a standard advice that you get in most marketing playbooks. In a lot of cases, that might not necessarily apply in developer tools companies, because these are highly, highly, opinionated folks who also like to do things themselves. So they're like, don't give me the marketing spiel. Just tell me what you do, right? Like, give me like a list of 20 features, and then I will decide whether you're the best in class anything, or let me be the judge of that. And like,
It's not your position to tell them what the benefits are, right? Because a lot of
yeah,
the time, I'm sure these tools they can mold in whatever way they want to and use however they want and build on top in the way that they want to. So they just need to have a base understanding of what it is you offer, and then their mind can go and run off with all the possibilities.
yeah. And ads don't work the same way. Like most engineers have ad blockers, like
Yeah.
what are you gonna do running an ad when they can't even see it? So like it's a very interesting experience.
So how do you get to them then? Do you go direct to them? Do you find little communities and groups, and that's how you infiltrate?
It's I think authenticity is super important. I think having involving the entire company, especially your engineering and product teams, to create content. I think it sort of comes down to influence, right? Like the strongest thing here is word of mouth. People are more likely to come to you if they believe in what you're doing, and if they hear about it from other friends or they have a good experience. And so influence ends up becoming really important. One of the hottest roles right now in tech companies, especially like these developer tools companies, is this role called developer relations. Or a developer advocate. And what these people do is essentially, these are engineers who also create content and do communities. So these are people who can write code. Really, like, they might not be as accomplished as engineers themselves who build the product, but they're pretty good, and they also like content. So like all these people that you see on YouTube who are creating these YouTube tutorials, or they're going and speaking at conferences, like these people end up almost developing a cult like status within the organization, because they are the face of your company. They are the ones on all your external communication. So that becomes a really, really important role, even though they might sit in marketing or have their own org. And they cost as much as regular engineers. So
It's exactly something we were talking about with another guest the other day. Basically, about saying that the coder of the future is going to be kind of managing upwards now and become more of a manager and have his fingers in more pies, as opposed to just being kind of heads down 90% of the time coding. He's going to be more in charge of managing processes, coordinating more with the outside world as well. And you see more and more product managers as well do it. I know in like scale ups, particularly companies that are looking to grow quickly, it's like, how can we onboard the right kind of people without bloating our headcount up and kind of eating into our revenues. And a
yeah,
big way to do that is by hiring people who can both be developers and more like product managers and do some outreach and talk to customers as well. So it's becoming more of a kind of jack of all trades role. That's just what I've seen. I don't know if you have a differing opinion on that.
I mean, the joke is that I think eventually all of us will just become people who give prompts to ChatGPT
Yeah, right.
rather than doing anything else. Like, that's going to start becoming a skill for regardless of like whether you're in tech or non-tech. But I think I think there's a role for all kinds of people. Specifically in engineering, there's two clear paths, right? There's people that want to be individual contributors. These are people that want to code and want to go deeper into the craft. And they don't want to manage people at all. They just want to be a one person, contributor and just keep on getting better. And then there are other people who want to, start managing the ops part of engineering, and really start managing people, and become a better people manager to make sure that the software is shipped on time and work with the product teams and things like that. I feel like there's both these paths, because like you put one person who doesn't like managing people in a role where they want to do that, they're going to quit. They're like, I want, because as a people manager you also stop actively coding, and so you slowly start getting your hands off, right? And you become more like a project manager, highly technical, but it's like two completely different sort of streams. It's almost like writing, right? Like where you can either become like an editor who's moving into like managing a team of writers, or you can just be like a really seasoned writer who's super senior, like a columnist or whatever, right? Like
Right.
I think it works
Yeah.
out in engineering
I,
as well.
I think a lot of engineers learn that in their first 3 to 5 years. Once they move past the junior stage of their career,
Yeah.
you sort of see that a lot of times, unfortunately, you either have a manager who you as a quirky, opinionated engineer think is incompetent, and you're like, why the heck am I taking orders from this person? Doesn't even know how the code actually works because I built it from the ground up. I've seen that quite a lot.
And it's
And I think
often it's often an internal tool that they've built, because those are the first things that they're going to be asked to be built.
absolutely right. And then
Yeah.
it's like they then turn around and think, I think I would be in a much better position down the line to be able to help a junior team grow, because I guess a lot of the technologies, a lot of big technologies are still coming out on a regular basis, because technology, as you know, obviously is ever evolving. It's never static. So just because someone graduated from top college 15 years ago in computer science does, unless they've been consistently learning for the last 15 years, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to know their stuff with all the new technology that comes out today. In fact, I remember hearing a CTO of a biotech company say he was a professor at Imperial College London, and he actually said we were interviewing him for a screening interview during a period of time where I worked in the venture capital space, and he said, most of our team who we hire are PhD graduates, because machine learning is one of those areas of technology where the younger you are, the better, because you have more of the skills that are actually applied day to day. The younger people are much more advanced at building proper machine learning pipelines than somebody who's got 30 years of SaaS experience and software development. But I think it's absolutely necessary as well, because as an engineer, you're essentially a creator, right? You're able to create things from arguably nothing, and you
Yeah.
realize you have a lot of power with the ability to do that. So if you can kind of level up with other softer skills and apply the same engineering prowess alongside those skills, the value of your contribution and the value that you can bring into the world is a lot greater. It's a lot more powerful. But interestingly, and it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, given that you've now started working full fledged with engineers more often. During my time at Imperial College, when I was there, I found a lot of my colleagues, much better engineers than myself, much better software developers, much better coding, but consistently lacked ambition and self-confidence of what their skills could actually achieve. Because my mentality, and you can ask James about this, is let me learn how to become like a 5.5 or a 6 out of 10 coder. And then the freedom that will give me to create interesting tools that I could potentially sell commercially is huge. Whereas a lot of my peers who were like 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 coders, they would always pick at things going, this class could be written more efficiently, or this is not good enough. And it's like at that point they're getting bogged down in the features and forgetting about the potential commercial benefit. Because at the end of the day, it's like if you're selling a software to, let's say, a marketing team, they don't really care like whether your algorithm speed is n log n or n squared. Like they just want to know, is it going to work? Is it going to work?
I think it's like
can my
it's
job
also
be
like
easier from this?
it's like a personality kind of thing as well, right? If you think about an artist who just has a love for the game and he just loves painting or drawing or whatever and couldn't give a damn if anyone else likes what he makes or if it has commercial value or if he can sell it. He just wants to get in the weeds and like spend hours by himself painting. From a non-coder's perspective, i.e. me, that's how I see a lot of hardcore programmers. I kind of see that, I draw parallels between that and like an artist who just loves his craft intrinsically rather than always thinking what's the commercial angle.
It's really interesting you're saying that. Actually, the founder of Y Combinator, Paul Graham, actually wrote a book called Hackers and Painters. Like
never seen that. So my Z Combinator will be coming in 2024 then.
No, absolutely. I think it's definitely a craft. I mean, you can use frameworks and things like that, but like I think it's definitely a craft. It's also the kind of things which you can. It's also very sort of community based. I think like because the tech world is more, especially with things like GitHub and all these different communities, you can get a lot of feedback on your work very, very quickly. And so the people that start seeing that and find like a interesting peer group, which may not even be part of your college now, given that we're all in a virtual world, can have a pretty transformational impact in the early days where you even decide, where you haven't picked your major or, like things like that. And you might figure out where to spend your time. I think the other thing is also around what does a place value? So if you look at the Bay Area, for example, there is a reason no VC there wears suits, because that is frowned upon. Like the real value there is using technology to create something. Those are the people who are compensated the most. Those are the people who are celebrated. Like nobody talks about, oh, here's this hotshot banker in San Francisco, right? You'd never see that headline. I think in the UK, what I've noticed is that like industries which are like highly valued are things like law or private equity, finance.
More traditional career paths.
Yeah, and those are the industries that are also, they might have the largest profit margins. The compensation there is sort of or consulting, right? Like it's on the higher end, compared to technology. Like it's hilarious how when I speak to a lot of companies in the UK, they still call tech as IT. Like it's almost insulting. Like which engineer wants to be called IT, man? Like IT is the dude with the ponytail sitting in a warehouse,
We're gonna get loads of angry emails now. Thanks a lot.
so like I feel like you can make you can make out like some of these little nuances, like even like my previous startup, which was in the HR tech space. Here's how we figured out the tech savviness of our clients. A client which was very engineering heavy would call, like the word they would use is tech. Okay. The client which was a more business person had not much idea about technology, but wanted to be where the cool kids were. They would call it digital. So the moment I would hear the word digital, I'm like, okay, that's a non-engineer who wants to get in on the action, right? Typically, you see like a lot of traditional companies, like the companies in the FTSE 100, they will use the word digital.
It's so true. When I was working at NatWest, any kind of forward thinking, the area of the office that had like the sofas and the colored bits of furniture, the whole team was like digital transformation, digital implementation, digital something. It's such a corporate go-to. Yeah.
And then when you hear IT, you're like, okay, like that is so far away.
It comes with a lot of baggage, right? There's a stigma around it almost now. Yeah.
It could mean two things. It could mean that, okay, this is going to be a big deal for us because now we can say whatever we want and get away with it. Or it's going to be a really long deal to make because you're going to be explaining half the time, how other companies in your space are so far ahead, or maybe it's not even an important part in your business or whatever, right? Like that's how we had like a mental radar to figure out where companies fell on a spectrum, or at least the leadership fell on the spectrum. So that was interesting.
Well, Rishabh, tell us about, I wanted to ask you about Goodfellas, your angel syndicate. What's that all about? Why don't you tell our listeners?
Yeah. So Goodfellas, obviously the name comes from the gangster movie. Goodfellas, he's a good fella. And
So are you investing in business or are you extorting them?
definitely, definitely. Uh, and love the companies I invest in the way mob members love each other. Uh, but
Debatable, but okay.
So still,
I've never known any stabbing your backs in the mob. That's for sure. No violence whatsoever. It's all love.
I don't want to be one of Rishabh's portfolio companies that start making a loss. I might end up at the bottom of the Thames.
so I think I used to angel invest in companies on an individual level. 2020, so between 2015 and 2020, I was primarily living in India, but traveling a lot to the US and the UK. And then 2020 was when, in the middle of the pandemic, was when I relocated to the UK and started living here. And one of the things that happened that I realized was that my entire network and ecosystem, especially in technology, was either in the US or in India. And all my friends in the UK were all bankers and consultants. So, one of the things that happens in ecosystems is that if you're out of the ecosystem, it doesn't matter how good you were earlier, you sort of get out of the action and you're very quickly forgotten. So there was a two-pronged sort of reason to even start Goodfellas. One was that I wanted to have an excuse to stay in touch with all the people that I had met coming to the UK, have that sort of connection with India and the US. And so Goodfellas became a great way where I would just bring together all these people and be like, hey, I'm going to be investing in a bunch of technology companies. And these are people who are operators, entrepreneurs, so on. Let's do this together. Many of these
Whereabouts in India were you based?
in Bangalore.
Oh, nice. I'm currently in Vizag, going to Hyderabad in 2 weeks, and then
Oh
Bangalore.
wow! I grew up in Hyderabad, so even though I'm from
Nice.
Kashmir originally, which is the northernmost state, because I did all my schooling, my Telugu is better than my Kashmiri, and
Oh, nice.
we
If
migrated and I love
if James wasn't here, we could break out into some
it.
Telugu, but we'll
Yeah,
spare him
yeah.
the troll.
And I'm so happy that I've finally found an Andhra biryani place in London, because I felt like London is huge on the North Indian. When normally people say Indian cuisine, what they mean is
Rishabh, you should go to East Ham. East Ham is the place.
Dude, I found a biryani place on Deliveroo called Toli Choki Biryani, man. Like
Nice.
that's a region in Hyderabad. So it's when I saw that, I was like, it's such a specific name.
Uh-huh.
That it's got to be good, right? Like you can't come up with a name like that and then not deliver, right? So yeah, they're gonna make a lot of money from me. But just coming back to the Goodfellas thing, I think on one side is just sort of getting in a lot of these operators and like sort of advice beyond the money kind of thing. And then the second part is obviously like a lot of entrepreneurs were, reaching out to me for either help or advice. And I wanted to put my money where my mouth is, specifically focused on B2B SaaS businesses and developer tools businesses, because that's what I understand. I've spent my entire life in B2B, whether it was in robotics or HR tech and now dev tools. I don't understand B2C at all. But B2B businesses just wanted to sort of, meet a lot of entrepreneurs all across the globe and figure out ways to help them. So that's how it
And
started.
what kind of stages and geographies do you look at, or are you geography agnostic?
Fairly geography agnostic, though, like truth be told, a lot of these companies do end up being incorporated in the US. Their operations might be anywhere in the world, but you're incorporated in the US just because it makes sense, from a future perspective, whether it's for fundraising or like if you want to get like global contracts and things like that. So most of these are like US incorporated companies, but like there's companies across. Most of them right now, at least in my portfolio, are either in Europe, US, or India.
And
Um,
is it difficult to incorporate a US company as a non-US citizen? Because I'm imagining for, let's say, some of our
Not
listeners
at all,
in
not at all.
okay.
You can throw money at that problem, and especially now with so many initiatives like Stripe Stripe's Atlas program, for example. Often your payment gateway provider helps you. Like it becomes like AngelList, Stripe, all these people now have extension services where they want to find these companies in the earliest days. And so, like a lot of them help, but there are other avenues to do that as well. So it's like you don't even have to visit the US to set up a US and call.
Okay, because that's quite useful to our listeners in case anyone's in
Yeah.
Asia, India, or even Europe, and they're looking to kind of have a global outlook with their company to incorporate a business in the US and
Absolutely.
have your operations elsewhere.
Yeah, the only difference becomes that, and that's a call you have to take, which is that, like obviously if you're a US company, then you don't benefit from things like EIS and some
Yeah,
of the schemes. But like the question I would ask is that, if you're a B2B company, you know, like your market is not going to necessarily be Europe. It might be like you might get some
absolutely. Yeah,
traction, but like individual markets are not that big here. So you are
yeah.
going to look at the US, and the earlier you do it, the better. Uh,
This is something that one of our contacts in India actually told James recently. I mean, we had a discussion about it where saying a lot of Indian companies actually target the US market because the USA is a culture and an environment that Indian people intrinsically understand from watching TV series and shows from an
everybody's got
early.
an uncle sitting in the US.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody grows up watching HBO whenever they're not watching Star Sports. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
But
but
Rishabh, tell us more about kind of what you look for in a SaaS company, because of course SaaS companies aren't all created equal. So what's a great investment target for you?
Um, so when I started out initially, I like to come in the super early stages. Often at like so typically invest in around pre-seed, seed, in some cases at the Series A stage. But
Can you give our listeners as well exactly kind of
yeah.
rough metrics for when that may be? So a pre-seed would be X number of users to, or if in the case of MRR, just give us a rough idea.
You can be pre-revenue in all the three cases. One of the things you notice is at least like it's not necessarily about revenue. It's at least what I look for in the early stages is there a clarity around what you want to do? Are the founders like really invested in the problem? And so typically I would either invest in founders that I personally know from before or people who've been thinking about a problem really, really hard. So for example, if you've been like a banker all your life and I don't know you or you don't come via referral, and now you're deciding to start a SaaS company in a completely unrelated space, chances are I would probably not be the best investor because like it wouldn't make sense to me. But if the same banker was somebody that I knew for a long time, then it's really more like you're betting on the person. And in the early days, you either bet on the person or you bet on the space. I go more towards the person because I feel like business models can pivot and things like that. In terms of the stage, typically, your first round tends to be a pre-seed or friends and family kind of a round. This is where you raise anywhere from, like, I don't know, 250 to maybe like 500K. Sometimes it goes up to $1 million. At this stage, you might or might not have like a working prototype. You might have done some customer research. You might have some early users. In some cases, you might have paying customers as well, but you haven't figured out your pricing, your business model. The product is not fully fleshed out. It's super, super, early. And so what you really have to fall back on is, hey, are you clear about the problem, right? Like, and how do you validate that problem, right? Either you're coming from that space or like you've done this much customer research and stuff like that. So I feel like that and like who are your co-founders, like what is the core team looking like, like I think that is what really matters at pre-seed stage, right? And like are you building that customers actually want, so
and Rishabh, what are the typical investment amounts that you would invest personally?
so so typically you look for allocations which are around $100 to $200,000. Uh, it can go higher. The challenge with running a syndicate is that it's not a fund, so it's not like people have already given you that amount and it's sitting in your bank. It's a lot like sales. So for every deal,
Yeah.
it almost becomes a marketing campaign at some point, right? Where you're like, hey, I'm going to invest in this company. Are you interested? Now, not all the members of your syndicate might be interested in that deal. So you might have to follow up with a few people. So there's like an operational angle to some of these things, but then you bring them on board saying that, I think they could really value from in fact, you use your investors in the syndicate also as a way to vet some of these deals because you end up getting expertise from multiple different areas. Individually, the people invest, like there's no limit. Like AngelList has a minimum limit of like I think $1,000, but individually people can invest anywhere between, what I have seen is between two to like maybe $20,000 in a deal. But like when you pool it together, typically it comes to anywhere between 100 to $200,000. So that becomes a meaningful, that does two things. One is that it helps the entrepreneur. It's always like the entrepreneur always wants to deal with fewer people, right? Like nobody wants to deal with 50 investors. So if you
Absolutely.
come in and take a large chunk of, like, say, if you're doing like a $1 million round, you've got a VC who's putting in $500,000. You've got maybe another accelerator or VC who's putting in something else. And then you have like this syndicate who's putting in 100K. You can pretty much get the round done with like 3 or 4 different touch points, right? Like, versus if you were to start getting individual checks, it starts getting a little complicated because now every time you have a board meeting, you have to like get everybody's signature, right? So it's
So
not very
do you
different from
usually
what
have
companies like Cedars and Crowdcube and these guys also do, right? They pool in that capital. So yeah.
So do you usually have an investor in the syndicate that effectively, leads the round, not from a financial point, but from a point of they will manage the process and be the touch point for the entrepreneur? Or do
Yeah,
you
you're
do you
you're
ever
you're you're looking at that guy. So I manage
okay,
the whole thing end to end for each of my deals. It's just
okay.
me who's running it. This is a part-time thing which I do because my full-time day job is at Appsmith, and it's just a good way to, even because of the space I'm in, I end up meeting a lot of entrepreneurs because AppSmith, for example, can integrate into pretty much most other tools out there.
Mhm.
So often, there's a nice balance between I might be doing something for AppSmith, but in that process, I might come across an interesting company. And so now I can reach out to that founder saying, hey, I'd love to learn about your business. And genuinely, we see how that can help AppSmith. But then on the side, also look and ask questions like, are you fundraising? What's it looking like? And that disarms the entrepreneur because, like, if an investor reaches out, they look at it very differently, right? Because they're going to be guarded versus if it's just like two founders or operators talking, it's a much more open conversation around, hey, what are you
Absolutely, yeah.
thinking? And, and then investment it just follows very naturally, right? Like you might say, hey, you've got a great business, just that it might not be right for the syndicate. You still then remain friends. You still figure out how you can, work with each other in other contexts. Or it might be like, I love this thing. Like, I'm just amazed by what you're doing. Like, I would love to, just be part of this round. So I feel like that, and that's one thing that I tell anybody who's starting a syndicate is that if you're an operator, it's an interesting model where you do a syndicate without doing this full time, unless it becomes like a big fund and you've got plans for that. But like otherwise, it's a great thing to do on the side because it creates a virtuous loop between your work, what you're doing, and these sort of hobbies, so to call it, right? So it almost becomes like catching up with friends for drinks, right? So you're like, hey, here are 3 companies. What do you think about? Because the other thing I noticed, actually, I forgot to mention this, which is that, the reason you lose track with people. So if you think about your friends who you are in touch with from university or school, that number is very low, right? Like the friends you're in touch with from school is probably a smaller number than the ones you're in touch with from university, because at some point you realize that you have either outgrown them. It can work both ways, or like you don't have things to talk about anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like what do you, because unless you're living in if once geographical proximity is removed, how do you stay in touch with people, right? You need some common ground. It could be a shared interest or whatever, right? So something like deal flow becomes a great way because there's a mutual interest in that technology. Somebody I might otherwise who's in a different part of the world, a deal in a space of their interest is a great way to be like, hey, it's been a while, let's catch up, I want to discuss something with you. And that becomes a great way to like build friendships over time and stuff like that, right? That's the other part which I really like about this model.
It's so important to reach out and to reach out to people in your network, your second degree and third degree connections. Put yourself in front of people. Try and maximize the number of kind of serendipitous relationships and connections you may make at events, whether in person or online, calling up someone who works in the space you're interested in. I'm a big advocate for that. And I agree. From personally as well, it's just unearthed so many different, new relationships, new friendships, connections that I can make with other people and this and that. But I wanted to touch as well, Rishabh, on your experience raising from Sequoia, right? In your last company, I understand you raised from Sequoia, obviously a huge name. Can you tell us about what that was like, how you kind of got in front of them, how you closed the deal, what that whole getting fundraising process was like for you?
Yeah. So Sequoia is obviously like one of the greatest investors. They've invested in Google and like Apple, and like they're legend, right? We raised from Sequoia's India office, which is a pretty large fund in itself. Like Sequoia has 4 offices. I mean, they recently obviously launched a UK office a couple of years back, but otherwise, like their big hubs are China, India, US, and Israel, right? And so the India office is pretty big. They manage like a couple of $1 billion in capital, very active. Because I had been part of the early stage ecosystem for a while, like my co-founder and I, we've been part of that ecosystem for a while. It really was more about just keeping them updated around just having a conversation, because they weren't the first investors in the company. So we had already raised capital from another fund called Matrix, which is also based in the US and China and India, and they're pretty awesome as well. And so when you're in the when you're raising your next round as opposed to the first round, the dynamics are a little different because people already know about you as a company, because your first round would have given them press release, so that you're already on the radars of a bunch of different funds. The second thing is that India doesn't have that many, like at a Series A stage, there aren't that many options. At least they weren't back then. So you have like 6 or 7 funds that can afford to put in a $10 to $15 million check. And so it's a pretty small ecosystem. What you typically do is, like, typically with these things, there's 2 things, right? One is you want to have access already. So you meet them at events, you get connected from common friends, you might know somebody in their portfolio company, and so you get introduced via that, right? And then the second point is just sort of staying in touch and keeping them updated, because typically the way a lot of these rounds happen is that there has to be some trigger event, right? Either A, you are doing so well financially you don't even need the money, in which case you don't have a problem of fundraising because you don't need the money, and everybody's going to be coming after you and they'll beg you to take the money. Or like most other companies, you've hit certain milestones and now you're looking for you're still burning cash, and now you're looking for the next set of investors. And so it's always good to keep them updated. So with Sequoia, they knew how we were thinking about it, multiple conversations around value alignment. Does this model make sense? And so that's how that deal ended up happening. The other part is also you have a lot of I feel like over and above other investors, I'm a big proponent of having really solid angels on your cap table, because investors have, obviously they're awesome, and they sit on your board and they have like a multiple other sort of portfolio companies and you can learn a lot from them, but having good set of angels are also good, because like they give you sort of advice from the trenches. They are less concerned about what happens to their capital, because the fund has to return money to the shareholders, right? Versus an individual angel, like they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, right? And they don't put in that large check. So I feel like having a really solid set of angels who are connected to the ecosystem also definitely helps, because these angels also act as VC whisperers, right? Like the entire VC ecosystem it's really sort of like a close-knit community. Everybody knows everyone. I'm sure it's the case in the UK as well, right? Because like every investor, most of them would have gone to the same schools, they would have come from similar backgrounds, people would know each other, somebody might have been your colleague a few years back. And so it's a bit like an echo chamber where you want to get in, right? And so it doesn't matter how you get in. You can either get in from the VC route, but you can also get in from the entrepreneur route. When I first came to the UK, the first thing I did was I just mailed every entrepreneur that I could find, cold emailed them, mailed every VC just to say hi. Like, I'm new here. What are you guys seeing? This is what my learnings is. And I feel like that applies to fundraising as well, right? Like you want to definitely start early. You want to, build those connections, because like the worst thing you can do is sort of think about fundraising when you have like 6 months of cash left, because then the investor also knows that, so you might not get such good terms, versus if you're showing somebody your journey, you're showing a momentum, you're showing like a progress, it's always a better approach to do it. And obviously you want to be clever about what you share at which stage. You want to keep some cards close to you, and then you want to reveal them in due course, while obviously like being truthful and everything. But like I think it's a bit like dating, right? Like like you want to put your best foot forward, and as you feel more comfortable, you want to sort of open up, right? Where you're like, hey, these
Absolutely.
are figured out. Honestly, that's why we need the capital, right? These are the things that we have figured out, and this is what's working really well. These are the things we need to reach to the next stage. So I feel like that becomes fairly important. That's what worked for us as well.
Yeah, it's really, really good information, actually. Even from the standpoint of you coming to the UK, wanting to get integrated with what's going on, and then just kind of reaching out to people just to say hello as well. Just
Yeah.
how detailed were those cold outreach emails? Were they big, or did you keep them brief? Or
Yeah, they were. So you do a lot of tests. You figure out what works for different kinds of people. I think with entrepreneurs, it's a very emotional connect often. It would be like, hey, I'm new here. And like, I feel like most cold emails, there is either an emotional connect there or there's like a relevance angle there, right? So if I would, I would make like a list of all these folks, and then talk about, spaces that I might have worked in, which might be similar, or like every entrepreneur loves if you try their product and give them like product feedback, like rather than, hey, let's just catch up a coffee, you don't know me. It'll be like, hey, I tried your product, I loved it, here are 3 or 4 things I noticed that you could do better. By the way, I just came to the UK and this is what I've done in the past. Would love to catch up and just learn your experiences about building a company, right? Like that worked really well. With VCs, it was a little bit more like, I'm figuring out my next steps. It's like a reset in my life. I'm new here, and just wanted to understand more about it from your what you're seeing. So like for them, it was more like, okay, let me meet this sort of senior leader who could potentially become maybe a hire for one of my portfolio companies, right? So like that potentially would be, even though I didn't say that and they're not saying it, but like that's the undertone of the discussion, right? Like that's
the underlying angle. Yeah.
They would want to talk to me, or they'll be like, you know what, maybe we can convince him to start up again, and then I would love to invest in that. Like these are the things sort of which are playing through the investors' mind.
Come with value, essentially, right? I mean, you opened with like, I came here and I sent out loads of emails saying hi, but it was a lot more than that, right? You're actually, you're not just saying, hey, this is like a little text that's going to get aired, but you're actually coming with value, and they can immediately see, all right, this guy, while not explicitly stating it, definitely has some latent value he can offer me, or vice versa, right?
Yeah. And there's always a value that anyone can offer, right? Like it's you just have to sort of figure out it could be something as simple as let me just connect you to five, six other people who could benefit your portfolio, right? Or it could be something like, hey, looks like you're doing something in this space. I know a bunch of people. Why don't we do a meetup in your office? Like anything, like, because I think the VC space and the entrepreneur space, it's become so competitive that anything that you can tell them which can help them differentiate can be super valuable to both parties, right? So like entrepreneurs are always thinking about their product and hiring, uh, and investors are always thinking about, hey, we have 50 other VCs and the entrepreneur can take money from any of these VCs. How do we stand out, right? Like what is it that we can do? And that's why you see like VCs also become more like full stack agencies in some way, where it's not just about the money, but now you have a talent function, you have an events function, you have a content function, and like things like that. Versus literally like earlier, it was just like, I'm a person with money in my bank account and I can go invest, right? Like I think we've come far from those days, and today when you look at VCs, they look like full service agencies, right? Like when you look at the kind of capabilities that they're trying to develop, uh,
Absolutely, yeah.
which is interesting.
And then find, yeah, and if you're trying to get into the space, trying to find where you fit in within that environment, because it's no longer, I think, speaking to VCs as well, is like they want you to be hard on one thing instead of being a generalist or someone who can do the full remit of things. What are your superpowers, so to speak? Like, what are you really good at, and how does that fit in within our wider org as an investor?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I get what you mean. But one of the things that I noticed, and that a lot of people will notice, is that when you're an entrepreneur, you're one of the worst hires to make, because you don't actually are, unless you're like a engineer who worked in Google for 10 years, now you're starting a company, whatever. But like most like non-tech entrepreneurs, or even tech entrepreneurs who've now started a company and done it for a few years, you're actually a horrible hire, because or at least on paper, because you don't fit the mold, right? Like you don't necessarily have one specific skill. And so an investor would love to talk to you if they're thinking in terms of, I want to invest in this person. But like if it's about connecting you to a portfolio company, they have like two thoughts, right? Because they're like one of the things that I noticed when I came here was that it was like when you're trying to sort of join early stage companies, the founder or the investor who wants to connect you is having like, two thoughts in their head. There's one thought which is around, can I trust this guy? Because in early stage companies, it's all about trust, right? So joining a big company like Facebook, they have a very streamlined process. Great. The process takes care of itself, right? Or reference. But in an early stage company, it's all about, can I trust this person? And then it's about, okay, now what skills does this person bring in? And you'll see like a lot of times generalists in a new market. So somebody coming from India to the UK, if you're a generalist, it might be challenging at times. Or if you're an entrepreneur, it might be challenging because it's very hard for people to box you into one thing. And when you can't box somebody into one thing, then like what, either they have to just give you a chance, be like, this person is smart, they've done so many different things, like they'll figure it out. Or you join in an unstructured role, like like a chief of staff or something like that, like a role which gives you a lot of those flexibilities. But like that's a it can become a challenge if not positioned correctly, is what I would say, that whole generalist thing as a founder.
Yeah, fantastic insights, Michael.
Yeah, very useful. Well,
Yeah.
Rishabh, thanks very much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I think our listeners will really benefit from the conversation. And I was also going to say, I'll probably pick up with you offline, because it would be good to have a chat about the startup ecosystem here in India, because I'm going to be here for like the next 6 to 9 months.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
it'll be great to speak to you specifically about Bangalore and even Hyderabad if you have any contacts or experience
Yeah,
there.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Lots of folks. In fact, even Vizag has like this fintech valley and stuff like that, right? Like it's just
It's
super,
great.
super interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll ping you an email in the next couple of hours, and then we can pick up and perhaps have a call about that, because that would be great.
absolutely. Yeah, happy to. Thanks,
But
thanks.
Rishabh, it's a pleasure, man. When I'm next in Central, I'll give you a shout. We can meet up for a drink as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Always up for a drink. I've learned that the UK is, this was like super interesting, that UK is an alcoholic country, man. Like I think UK is the only country in the world where it's not frowned upon to have hard liquor at 11:30 a.m. on a weekday. If
It
you're
makes you
having
classy. On the
7:30
contrary, it's a great thing, you know. Have some scotch on the rocks in a nice suit in like a leather chair, and yeah, you look like the man.
only in the UK. Love it. Love
That's why I'm never leaving.
it. Wonderful. Cheers, man.
But anyway, Rishabh, take care of yourself, man. All the best.
Take care. Take care, Suraj. Take
All
care.
the best.
Bye
See
bye.
you. Bye bye.